Microsoft just shipped 7 of its own AI models trained from scratch, and not a single one of them used OpenAI to do it. The flagship reportedly scores 94.5% on the AIM 2026 math test, and in a blind human test, people preferred it over Claude Sonnet 4.6. That is the company that put OpenAI's tech inside Windows, quietly telling the world it can now build the brains itself. Here is why that should grab your attention, even if you never touch a developer tool. For years, the simple story was that Microsoft was the money and OpenAI was the magic. Microsoft paid the bills, and OpenAI's models powered Copilot, Bing, and a huge chunk of what you saw labeled as Microsoft AI. So when Microsoft AI walks on stage at its Build conference on June 2, 2026, and reveals a full family of in-house models, that is not a small product update. That is one of the biggest companies on Earth saying it would rather not depend on its closest partner. And the reason matters to you because less dependence usually means more competition, and more competition usually means cheaper, faster tools landing in apps you already use. Let me explain what these models actually are, in plain language, because the names sound like robot serial numbers. Think of MAI as Microsoft's own house brand of AI. Instead of renting the engine from someone else, they built a whole garage of engines, each tuned for a different job. There are 7 of them, and they cover reasoning, coding, image generation, transcription, and voice. Stick with me, because the most interesting one is also the one with the strangest math behind it. The headliner is called MAI Thinking -1, and it is the deep reasoning model, the one meant for hard problems that need step-by-step thought. Here is the part that sounds like a typo but is not. It has roughly 35 billion active parameters and about 1 trillion total parameters. Let me make that make sense. Parameters are the dials a model adjusts as it learns, and more dials usually means more capability, but also more cost to run. MAI Thinking -1 uses a design called a sparse mixture of experts. Picture a giant hospital with 1,000 specialists, but when you walk in, you do not consult all of them. You only wake up the few experts who handle your exact problem. That is the trick. The model holds 1 trillion parameters of knowledge, yet only fires up about 35 billion of them for any given question. You get the brains of a huge model at a fraction of the running cost. That cost angle is the whole point, and we will come back to it. It also has a 256,000 token context window, which is just a fancy way of saying how much it can hold in its head at once. 256,000 tokens is enough to read a long book or a sprawling codebase, and still remember the beginning by the time it reaches the end. For anyone who has watched an AI forget what they said 3 messages ago, that is the upgrade that quietly changes everything. Now, here's the claim that made people stop scrolling. Microsoft says MAI Thinking -1 was trained from scratch on commercially licensed data, without distilling from any third-party model. Distillation is when you train a new model by having it copy the answers of an existing one, almost like a student memorizing a smarter student's homework. Plenty of models lean on that shortcut. Microsoft is saying this one did not learn by copying OpenAI or anyone else. It learned on its own licensed material. Whether you take that at face value or not, the message is unmistakable. They want it on record that this brain is homegrown, so how good is it really? Microsoft reports MAI Thinking -1 scores 97.0% on AIM 2025 and 94.5% on AIM 2026. IM is a tough high school math Olympiad exam, and those are the kinds of problems that wreck most people and most models. On coding, Microsoft says it is competitive with Claude Opus 4.6 on a benchmark called SWE Bench Pro, which tests whether a model can fix real software bugs, not toy puzzles. And in that blind human evaluation, I mentioned testers, who did not know which model was which preferred MAI Thinking -1 over Claude Sonnet 4.6. Now, a fair reminder. These are the company's own reported numbers, the way a car maker quotes its own mileage. Impressive on paper, worth watching how they hold up once outside testers pile on. But even taken with healthy skepticism, this is not a toy. Let me run you through the rest of the 7, because the supporting cast is where this gets practical. There is MAI Code -1 Flash, a lean coding model with about 5 billion active parameters. Microsoft has already wired it into GitHub Copilot and VS Code. Flash is the keyword there. Smaller and faster, built to keep up with your typing instead of making you wait. Then there is MAI Image 2.5 for generating images, Massachusetts I Transcribe 1.5 which handles speech to ultimed, text across 43 languages on 5 and MAI, Voice -2 for generating spoken audio, reasoning, coding, image transcription, voice. That is a near complete toolkit and Microsoft owns every piece of it now. There is one more model worth singling out, and it is the most serious of the bunch. Microsoft co-developed a separate clinical reasoning model with Mayo Clinic, aimed at medical reasoning. I want to be careful and clear here, because this is exactly where hype gets dangerous. A model built with a hospital does not replace a doctor, and nobody is claiming it does. It is a tool meant to support clinical reasoning, and the fact that they partnered with Mayo Clinic instead of going it alone tells you they know how high the stakes are when AI gets near a real diagnosis. Now let me close the loop I opened at the start, the why should you care loop. CNBC framed this whole launch as Microsoft trying to lessen its reliance on OpenAI and lower costs for developers. Read that twice. Lower costs for developers. When the company that builds your operating system can suddenly make its own AI cheaper to run, that saving does not just sit in a spreadsheet. It tends to flow downhill into the apps, the subscriptions, and the features you actually pay for. A trillion parameter model that only fires 35 billion at a time is at its core a bet on doing more for less. And here is the common mistake people make watching news like this. They assume a benchmark win means one model is now king. It does not work that way. The real story is not which score is highest this week. It is that there is now one more serious player building frontier AI in-house, which means no single company gets to set the price. So what should you actually do with this? Honestly, mostly just pay attention to the right thing. When you see headlines screaming that one model beat another, look past the score and ask who is now competing that was not before. That is the signal that predicts cheaper, better tools landing in your hands. If you are a developer, the practical move is simple. At launch, Massachusetts I Thinking -1 was in private preview on Microsoft Foundry, which is Microsoft's platform for building with these models, so that is where you would go to actually try it once access opens up. And MAI Code -1 Flash is already living inside GitHub Copilot and VS Code, screencase. So you may end up using it without even choosing to DAO. So, back to where we started. Microsoft quietly shipped a whole family of models trained without OpenAI data, topped by a trillion parameter reasoner that posts 94.5% on a brutal math exam and won a blind human vote against Claude Sonnet 4.6. The headline is not really 7 models. The headline is independence, and the cheaper, faster AI that competition like this tends to drag along with it. If you want to understand the deeper machinery behind why that trillion parameter trick works without melting a data center, watch my breakdown of how mixture of experts models actually decide which experts to wake up. That is where the real magic is hiding.